Hi, my name is Janine Payne, and I am joined by Sherelle Thompson, and we are co-executive directors for the Institute for the Advancement of Women's Health. Welcome to our Women's Wellness Lounge. At IAWH, we build trust in the delivery of evidence-based health research to enhance a woman's decision-making about care. And I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar on caregiving, the support that you need for the support that you give. In several days, we will send you an email that will include a link to our recording. So you'll have that available. We also like you to know that we are streaming Facebook Live and that you will be able to visit our page at any time to review the entire session. Maybe it's a point that you missed, you'd like to go back to, you'd like to share it with someone, please do so. And you'll find us on Facebook at Advancing Her Health, at Advancing Her Health, the @ sign. That's me. I am Janine Payne, co-executive director of IAWH. And this is my co-executive director, Sherelle J. Thompson. We're both happy to greet you in the Women's Wellness Lounge. We'll take a brief look at the agenda for this session, caregiving, the support that you need for the support that you give. We've done our welcome. One of the next steps that we will take is I would like to walk through just a few facts, if you will, details about caregiving. Some you may have heard and some that you may not. We have two caregivers that are standing by. We're calling this section of our presentation the Faces and Voices of Caregivers. And we know that you will appreciate hearing from them, as many of you are serving in the role now, or you may in the future. And then we will introduce and present our guest speaker, and then to have an open and lively discussion with you. And then we're going to close and have a summary of remarks by our guest speaker and IAWH. So first, I'm just going to read a few facts that you may not be aware of, starting with a 2020 report that was released by the National Alliance for Caregiving, that's NAC. This is the organization that our guest speaker, Karen Lindsey Marshall, is affiliated with, and the AARP. This report was titled Caregiving in the U.S. The report is based on a national online survey with over 1,300 caregivers ages 18 and older. So here are some of the findings that you may find interesting. While many caregivers feel their role has given them a sense of purpose or meaning, that's 51% that were surveyed, they said that these positive emotions often coexist with feelings of stress and strain. Caregivers report physical, emotional, and financial strain, with 2 out of 10 reporting they feel alone. That's 21% of those that were surveyed. When compared to a 2015 survey, fewer caregivers report their health status as excellent or very good. So that's at 41%. That's down from where it was in 2015, which was 48%. So people are feeling a bit less confident that their health is excellent or very good. And a greater proportion report being in fair or poor health. That's 21%. And that's up from the 17% in 2015. So in 2015, there were more people who reported that they felt better about their health. And then that was reduced in 2020. Finally, the data shows that the majority of us, women, have been or currently are or will be caregivers. 3 in 5 caregivers are women, that's 61%. And 2 in 5 are men, 39%. Yes, men are providing caregiving as well, but our emphasis today is on women, as we are the majority. I've made this point for a reason. Our ability to care for others begins with taking care of ourselves first. So I'll give you an overview of caregiving in the US with an emphasis on physical and emotional impact that those that serve in this role experience. And our next step is for you to hear from some of those caregivers. And so I'll turn it over to Sherelle.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherelle Thompson, as Janine said, and I would like to introduce you to 2 caregivers so that we can hear their stories. Janine will introduce our guest speaker in just a moment, Karen Lindsey Marshall from the National Alliance of Caregiving. But before we hear from our main speaker, let's hear from 2 caregivers who have personal experiences that hopefully will resonate with all of us. First, let's hear from Sherelle Carper. Sherelle, please share your experience in caregiving with us.
Good morning, ladies. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I want to thank Janine for asking me to do this. At first, I didn't think I could be able to, but then I thought about it and I said, my mom's been dead for 10 years as I was her caregiver. And I said, in honor of her, that I would be able to do this. So thank you again for inviting me. It's an honor for me to be here to be able to speak to her. When my mom passed, I was the only child. My brother had been deceased about 10 years. And so I was also working. I was also a wife. I was also a mother. I was also a grandmother. Back in 2010, I was very, very in the prime and busy parts of my life. My mom had moved here because I'm in Virginia. My mom relocated from South Carolina. And that was another important part of my life that occurred. All the years I had been listening and doing whatever my mother had told me to do. And lo and behold, she was in South Carolina and I was here in Virginia, and we were 8 hours apart. And she had taken a fall. And I had been calling and I couldn't reach her. And so finally, the neighbor called the neighbor, and they went, they called the police of the fire department. Anyway, long story short, they had to break the door down. She had fallen, she couldn't get up and shit. So then I had made up my mind that, okay, putting my foot down, you are going to relocate here to Virginia. And she kicked and screamed and hollered, no, 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 I'm born in South Carolina, I'm going to die. This is where you reverse the roles. You now become the mother. And I had to tell my mom, my son, my children, we got a moving van, went and relocate her. And I found a place for her here in Virginia, where now she is 30 minutes from me versus 8 hours from me, which was a major decision, but I had to do it. Her health started declining. I got her all involved in aftercare programs, senior citizen. And she was looking forward to Meals on Wheels, all the things that I had no idea how to do all this, but God, of course, gave me all of the resources that I need to put her on her way. So it was, and I then relocated her because her health started declining. She was in like independent living, and I had to relocate her into somewhat semi-dependent living, assisted living, which was now right across from where I lived. And it was in 2010, on her birthday, I had gotten tickets to take her to a play. And when I went over to get her, pick her up to take her, she said, I'm not feeling well. And my mom's now, this was her 80th birthday. I'm sorry, this was before that. She was about 78 years old. Anyway, I'm all mixed up on the age. I'm sorry. I think she was about 83. Anyhow, she started feeling faint, and I had to end up calling the ambulance because I didn't know what was happening. Called the ambulance, they came and they took her to the emergency room. And of course I had to follow it in my car. And when she got there, the doctor on staff on duty said, I don't know how your mom has made it this long. She was bleeding, profusely bleeding. And I'm saying, wow, how did this happen all of a sudden? He said, apparently there's something wrong with her kidneys. Anyway, long story short, she ended up staying in the hospital for a week. That night, I never forget, I spent the night there in the hospital with her. She didn't recognize me. She didn't know who I was. She was just disoriented. And they did something where they had to do a thorough cleansing of water, irrigation, just clean up. And finally, I got the doctor came in who was on duty and told me that apparently she had cancer of the bladder. And I'm saying, I've been taking my mom to the hospital for the last year or so, how come no one ever diagnosed this? What in the world is going on? I was angry at that point. I was told that she had 6 months to live, and I just didn't understand. I wanted to go back to the doctor where she, who was taking her caregiver, her doctor, and I was just angry. And then God said, no, just focus on taking care of your mom. And so for the next 6 months, in and out of hospital rehabs, we used to kid around. She would say, don't you ever put me in a nursing home. And I said, well, if you don't behave yourself, that's where you're going. One day when she wasn't, she did something. I said, okay, that's it. I'm putting you. But I realized that at one point from the rehab and going back and forth, that I did have to end up putting her, taking her to a nursing home that was near where I lived. And fortunately, it was a good one. She was okay. She had a nice roommate. But as she started declining and her health started failing, things just started going downhill at the nursing home as well. And so I just, when I went to visit her one day, because I would go after work every day, she told me, I want to go home. And so I had no choice. I didn't know what that meant, but I started doing research, contacted Medicare, Medicaid, contacted care facilities, national care facilities here in Washington, D.C. I just started making all kind of phone calls. And I brought my mom home, got a hospital bed, did all things that needed to be done. She was in a 2-bedroom apartment. So I was working. I didn't have anybody to take care of her because even though I was going over every day, that was not enough. She needed 24-hour care. So a friend of mine who worked for Prince William County told me to put an ad on Craigslist, and I did. I put an ad in Craigslist looking for someone who could move in and just be with my mom from 8 at night till 8 in the morning. And then I had to also get a caregiver for her from 8 in the morning to 8 in the afternoon. Anyway, it ended up, someone answered my ad. It was a Caucasian woman. At first I was reluctant, but I said, she needs a place to stay. She'll be with my mom. I need someone for my mother. So it worked out. And she moved in. And one thing, she couldn't cook. So I still had to come over and cook every night, but that was not an issue. But one of the things when she came on board, she said, we need to get a book. And so I purchased just a little black and white book for me to put in. Every day we had to put in time. We had everyone who worked with my mom had to put in their initials of what they were doing and all the medications. She was on, in the end, she was on oxygen, how much oxygen, her intake of food, her intake of medicine. And so it was on December 21st. She was not breathing that well. She was on oxygen. She wasn't responding. She wasn't talking. But this particular night, she opened her eyes, and I had the pastor of my son's church there. He came and he prayed with her. So she seemed to be coherent at that time. That was on a Tuesday night. I left. We all went home. Mary was with her. That was the lady who was staying there. And this I want to read from my book. It was at 5:00 a.m. in the morning. Mary says, I retrieved the laundry, opened the drinks, refused wet dries, mouth sponge, fresh water, and oxygen tank. 5:19, Mrs. Blunt resting quietly, breathing calmly. 5:56, call Evercare to advise shallow breathing. And at 5:58, call Sherelle about the breathing. At 6:05, Mrs. Blunt not breathing. So by the time she called me, it was like I got over there in 10 minutes, and it was like my mom didn't want me to see her go. When I got there, she was gone. So, and then the rest, I was a power of attorney. I had to make the decisions of, she said she never wanted to be restorated. So all of that came into play, and all the things that I had to do after that. The people, they came, they pronounced her dead. All of the medication had to be thrown away. I called my pastor, my church, he came. We had to wait for the funeral home to come and get the body. December is not a good month for me. Like I said, next month on the 22nd will be 10 years. So I just thank God for getting me through this today. And I thank you all for this. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your really personal story with us. This is very relatable on so many levels. Hopefully our speaker, Karen Marshall, will be able to pick up on some of the very poignant points that you listed out for us. The suddenly being thrust into being a caregiver, the juggling of roles, the needing assistance as a caregiver as it becomes overwhelming. So thank you so much for sharing this very personal story with us. So let's take a breath and move on to our next face and voice of caregiving, and we can hear from Lisa Woods. Lisa, thank you for joining us today. And if you would be so kind to share your story with us as well.
Absolutely. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, what a powerful organization you are, how awesome of an opportunity that you provide to people through this forum to empower, enlighten, educate them about all types of subject matter. And so I'm honored to be a part of this forum and this subject matter. I ask myself often, how did I get here? I know that I'm doing what I know to do with what I know how to do based on the resources that I have available. And on December 26, 1995, I was at work and I received a phone call from a friend who just happened to be in town and was at my next door neighbor's home. And she told me that my mother had fallen. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. No, she didn't. I thought it was a joke. She said, no, your nephew just called 911 and he was 7 years old. So fortunately, I only worked about 5 minutes from my house. And sure enough, when I came here, it was true. And my mother was 63 years old. That accident changed her life forever. But she was trying to retrieve a face cloth to bathe my niece, and she missed a step and damaged her vertebrae. They thought that she would never walk again, but she was resilient and just determined to walk. And while the accident altered her state of being, she has poor dexterity to this day, but she still has the mindset that she can do all the things that she used to do. Her long-term memory is phenomenal. She has this thing when people ask her, how old are you? She says, I'll tell you what year I was born in and you can figure it out. So she's now 88, feisty as ever. But this whole task of caregiving is someplace I never even thought about being. And it'll be 25 years in December. It's a whirlwind of emotions. You go through cycles of depression that you never really identified as depression, the sadness, the helplessness. For me, there's a lot of anger and resentment because I don't believe that I get the assistance from my family that I believe I should be given. And at the same time, understand that everybody else has a life as well. But you just don't understand how anyone could believe that one person could do it all. I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter. So I've got both spectrums of the cycle, the true toddler and then the adult who behaves in an adolescent manner because of her diseases. She's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I keep saying it's the beginning stage, although doctors challenge it because they talk about, they do some type of rating system where they look at functionality and they determine if you're 50%, if you're 60% or whatever. And so I guess the denial in me always challenges it in the doctor's office. Oh no, she can do this and she can do that. I'm just not ready to concede, so to speak,
Mhm.
with the future outcome. And my mother has the mindset where she believes that she can do all the things that she's always done. Sometimes my tolerance is very low, and it comes across as anger. And immediately thereafter, I ask God to help me, pray, give me the strength to endure what I think is intolerable, just to exercise the patience that my mother deserves because of all that she's given to me. And I tell myself that as long as I'm able to keep her in the home with one person assist, because she has an aide, and as long as that aide is able to care for her without needing a second person, she can stay home. I get angry sometimes because the behavior that's exhibited, I think, is kind of like, oh, you're putting on, you can do this. I get a lot of, I'm doing the best I can. And I'll say, well, no, you're not, because yesterday you were able to do, but you know, I'm a former letter carrier, and we always say every day is different. And it's true. Depending on what stages her mind is going on and what her body is doing, every day is different. So you get into the guilt piece because, you know, again, my mother deserves so much more. And oftentimes I think a nursing facility could give her what I'm not able to give her. Maybe a lack of emotions and just caring for her for who she is and what she needs. But again, I'm not ready to concede with my mother needs to be in a nursing home because it's something she wouldn't do to anyone else.
Mhm.
And, you know, here lately, I realized that it's been 24, almost 25 years of me solely caring for my mother. And you know, when you look at it and you think about what you deserve as well, I think sometimes, man, how much life did I give up in 24 years? And, you know, there's a little selfishness that desires to do something different, but it's just who I am and all I know to do what she needs to have done, regardless of what I want for myself. I think it's a sacrifice that I'm giving that at some point will change to what is best for her. This is the hardest task that I've ever endured. I mean, you know, we get all psyched up about applying for a job and seeking wealth and all the opportunities for increased finances, and the preparation that goes into that is nothing compared to getting up every morning. So this morning I got up, and when I was testing my phones to make sure it wasn't interrupted, I knew when I made the phones ring, my mother would try to answer. So I had to go and say, hey, it's just me. I'm getting on this conference. Don't try to answer the phone. But she has her own mind. Oftentimes I would sleep on the couch. And one morning I kept hearing Lisa. And so I'm looking up over the ceiling thinking she's calling me from upstairs. And I turned to my left and she's on the steps. She scooted down the steps. And of course, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, so I'm angry. Like, Mom, why did you do that? You know better. You should never have come down here. How are we going to get you back up? So she can get down relatively quickly. I usually would get her to the top step, sit her down, let her scoot down. But once I do that, she doesn't want to go back upstairs. Come on, Ma, I got to get you upstairs. I'm not going back upstairs. So we got to do that thing. And then there's the frustration that comes along with that. But eventually I'll get her upstairs. I think that the most important thing associated with caregiving is talking to people, learning the resources, because as I said, it's been 24 years. My mother, since February, has had in-home aid. She's recently qualified for Medicaid. I don't even remember applying for Medicaid for her, but she's got Medicaid. The people are amazing. They came into the home, did some assessments, told her that she was entitled to either a lift or a walk-in tub. They'll provide the accessories to allow her to get up the stairs with the lift electronically, just Meals on Wheels. Just recently, I was given some information with people that would come and visit the home. Physicians, she has a podiatrist that comes every 2 months and gives her not a pedicure, but kind of cuts her nails down. And I noticed since that has been happening, the swelling that my mother has had in her legs, she didn't have. And, you know, there's so many things that caregivers are not aware of. I used to think that she was just not trying hard enough when she was trying to get up the stairs. And as it ended up, her feet were swollen and her nails were overgrown and she was in pain. So silly me, I'm upset and thinking, oh, you can do better. And there's so many things that they're unable to communicate to you. And you've got to just really kind of do a once over in terms of her body, just checking her body. I just recently told the aide, hey, let me show you. I know this is what you do, but this is what I've been doing. And my mother's legs are ashy. So I need for you to make sure that you're putting some Vaseline. I had to go old school. Some Vaseline on her legs, make her skin, make her feel cared for, give her the same beauty treatment that you would give yourself. And so sometimes I'm upset with myself because I think of how long I missed all of that. You know, how long I just accepted that they were caring for her in a manner that she needed to be cared for. It's just an amazing task. And if you can indulge me for just a moment, I forgot to say that in preparing to participate in this forum, I did some research, a little research, and it enlightened me because I always have what I call these grandiose ideas. I'm trying to find my document that I know what I know and I know what people need. When I ask my siblings to help, I always give them a to-do list. And when I look today, I found that you have to accept help, but you have to be prepared for the person that's helping to tell you what they can do instead of you telling them what you want them to do. I learned that you have to set realistic goals, you know, by breaking large tasks into smaller tasks. You have to get connected with different resources. In my work, I'm an EEO specialist, equal employment opportunity specialist. And oftentimes I find myself telling people about the employee assistance program and 211, first call for help, which I utilize. And it gives you resources. You give them your zip code, you tell them your circumstances, and they tell you if there's things that can be done to help. I've also utilized the, hope I don't mess this up, Western Reserve Area of Aging. They provide a lot of resources. And so I just think that the biggest piece is to get the resources that can provide you help. I don't profess to endorse any of the agencies, but I know that they've worked for me. And I think that they would be good for other people. So that's pretty much everything I have. But again, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to share my experience with you all and everybody that's listening. And I hope that something I said will help someone else with some type of peace, or if they don't get peace, at least some resources that can make their life more tolerable.
Yes.
So
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you, Sherelle, for both of your testimonies. And Lisa, you really got into the emotional roller coaster of caregiving, the guilt, the resentment, the anger, the depression. And I think that our speaker will address all of that as well, but also the trauma and the heartbreak of losing someone and seeing them transform before your eyes, turning into someone that you didn't know. they're not the same person that they were when you knew them before. So thank you again for sharing these stories. There are many elements that I'm sure all of us can relate to in some way. Janine?
Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you again to both the faces and voices of caregiving. I am overwhelmed. Thank you. As Cheryl mentioned, let's take a breath. It gives me honor to introduce our guest speaker and facilitator, Karen Lindsey Marshall, JD, is Director of Advocacy and Engagement at the National Alliance for Caregiving. Karen began her career as a regulatory and government affairs attorney, primarily representing the financial services industry. Karen's career detoured when she became a family caregiver for both parents, helping them face multiple severe illnesses and aging issues. During her time caregiving, she provided care both in-home and as a working long-distance caregiver. Those experiences ultimately inspired her to found Kadamba Tree Foundation. It's a nonprofit offering education and support programs, as well as evidence-based interventions to family caregivers, like you, like us. She is a certified program leader for the Rosalind Carter Institute, RCI, and it's called Caring for You and Me, and dealing with dementia programs. She has also been a certified interventionist and master trainer for the Rosalind Carter Institute's evidence-based resources for enhancing Alzheimer's caregivers' health. RCI REACH is the acronym, and it too is a program. In addition to developing and facilitating caregiver programs, Karen has helped community groups and governmental entities develop and deliver caregiver outreach programs. She frequently speaks as a caregiver advocate and has volunteered as a caregiver support group facilitator and presenter for the Alzheimer's Association's National Capital Area chapter. She is also actively engaged in and continues to support efforts to establish local collaboratives and coalitions that serve family caregivers. In her current role with NAC, she helps develop advocacy infrastructure for a state and local grassroots coalition network, and also supports legislative and regulatory efforts for caregivers. I now share the mic and pass the mic to Karen Lindsey Marshall. Please welcome her.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you so much. Thank you to you and Cheryl. I really appreciate IAWH having me here this morning and for this space that you've created. I respect so much that you created this, and your website, you call it a safe space for women. And I truly appreciate that. And I truly appreciate that you opened the door to let caregivers come in and talk this morning. And I want to thank Sherelle and Lisa for telling your story and your stories. So much resonated with me. There are so many familiar pieces that I heard, not just for myself, but from the caregivers that I've worked with over the years. And I can't see all of your faces, but I'm on the call this morning. I imagine that you were nodding in agreement for a lot of what you heard. And I want to thank you for being here this morning and sharing this space together. So I was listening to my bio, and I've heard the bio. I had to write the bio. I had to write it for work. So I was listening to it, and all I could think of was, yes, I've done X, Y, and Z related to caregiving, and yes, those are my experiences. But as I come to you this morning, the main thing I can say to you is that I'm just a woman who loved her mom and who loved her dad and wanted to do the best that she could. And I'm getting a little teary thinking about it this morning and having this space to talk about it with other caregivers. I'm now a former caregiver. Both of my parents have passed. But I just respect so much the journey that you all are on. And you know, it was difficult. It was a difficult time in my life. I'm not gonna mince words about it. The years were difficult, trying to manage my life. When I became a caregiver, it was just a few months, not even 6 months after I got married. I think I was 29. I had graduated from law school a couple of years earlier, and I was working for a big law firm, which I was thankful for because it meant that I could pay back those loans that I took out to go to law school. And it was a demanding job, but I was very enthusiastic about it. I got married, and my mother had had digestive issues since I was in middle school. And mind you, when I'm beginning the story, I was 29 at the time after I got married. And, you know, there were few things my mother could eat and not get sick. And I spent decades actually, begging her to go to the doctor, not just me, but the rest of my family. I'm begging her to go to the doctor, get herself checked out, find out what was wrong. And my mother's answer was always, I know it's going to be something bad, and I don't have time for it because too many people are depending on me. There's too much I have to do. I specifically remember her saying this when I was in the 8th grade. Fast forward to when I'm 29, my mother, who's now grandmother at this time, not for me, but for my sister, she decides it's finally time to go to the doctor. And she goes to the doctor because it's impossible for her to eat. She just can't digest anything. So I take a day off from work. I'm living in Washington, D.C. My family lives in Southern Virginia. She was getting care at a hospital. I'm from a rural area, so my parents had to travel quite far to get medical care. So she had an appointment in Central Virginia. So we met in the middle for her appointment. I should pause for a second and tell you about my dad. My dad was a logger all of his life. My dad went out into the woods and cut down trees for a living, and he and my mom, especially mom, gave me grief for not going into the family business. But he was self-employed, and you know, his work depended on him being out and being physical. This is how he provided. This is how he and my mom got by. She had worked in a department store also. And he took off his day of work, so he's self-employed. He doesn't get paid. That means he doesn't get paid. That means there's income that they're not going to have. And I take off a day from work. I'm working for a law firm, so obviously, you know, I can do that. I'm still getting paid. I can take off my time to go do this. And these are important points for later in the story. So we meet in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is where my mom was getting care. And my dad, he didn't have very good hearing because he worked around really heavy machinery and he refused to wear his earplugs. And he was there with me, the three of us. And my mom was put under, given anesthetic, and I think it's called an endoscopy. It's been a while, so I forget the name of the actual term. But basically, they put a tube down her throat to see what was going on. And she was out. My dad and I were in the room with her, waiting for the doctor to come in. And the doctor comes in. She's not lucid at this point. And the doctor says, you know, there's a tumor in your mother's stomach. And it's basically the mass of it is basically taking up her entire stomach. This is why she cannot eat. We have to obviously run tests to confirm, but it is cancer. My dad heard this, and you know, to this day, I don't know if it's because of the hearing problem or if it's because he just didn't want to hear it. But he's hearing this conversation with the doctor, and you know, my mom begins to come through, and she asks what the doctor said. And so I defer to let my dad begin to speak, and he's like, "Oh, he said you're going to be all right." And I said, Dad, did you hear what he said? He was like, yeah. I'm like, I don't think you did. And I had to break the news to her and to him about what was going on. And so I go into this detail about my mom's diagnosis because I think it's important for you to know that my mom, she was right. A lot of people depended on her. In my entire life, a lot of people depended on her. When I was a toddler, she was a caregiver for her father. When my father was injured running his sawmill, uh, she was his caregiver. He recovered. But she was his caregiver for that time. I had very severe asthma when I was a little girl. I was in and out of the hospital. My mother was my caregiver. I remember that there were moments when I didn't feel like I could breathe unless she was at my side, encouraging me. She was a caregiver for my grandmother when my grandmother had a stroke. And later, I suspect my grandmother had dementia, but it was never diagnosed that way. Where I was, people just called it being senile. I'm pretty sure my grandmother had dementia, but it wasn't diagnosed as such. But she was her caregiver. So I mean, and I could go on and on, all of the instances where my mother was a caregiver. But she didn't identify it that way. She was just playing her role. She was caring for the people that she loved in her life. And she was not caring, except for herself. She was not caring for herself. And, that stuck with me. So my mother, she had the tumor removed. And ironically, she finally went to the doctor because she could no longer eat because this tumor had gotten so big. They removed the tumor and they also removed most of her stomach. So she had a tiny, tiny little stomach, and she could barely eat after the surgery because she just didn't have any room for it to go. And then there were absorption issues with the nutrients, and we would just start watching my mother waste away, basically. She went through radiation, she went through chemo, and, my father was with her the entire time, not working. And I'm so thankful that I was in a position that I was able to help them out financially. But if it hadn't been for that, I don't know how they would have gotten by. She fortunately had great medical insurance working for that department store, but they didn't have money to cover the out-of-pocket expenses. She had to have radiation 2 hours from where they live, at a facility 2 hours from where they lived, every day for weeks. So I got them a room at a residence inn, and my parents wouldn't have been able to afford that. I mean, today I wouldn't be able to afford that. I don't know how they would have been able to get what they needed and live comfortably. And that's the position that so many caregivers are in. So fast forward to a few months after my mom's finished all of her treatments, she's still basically not able to eat. She can't keep food down. And, we go back, I remember it was around Christmas time. So, I really, I feel what you're saying, Sherelle, about anniversaries coming around, because Christmas time comes around, and whenever Christmas comes, I just remember that Christmas where it went from my mother and I, the family preparing meals, to that Christmas when my mom just absolutely could not eat, and within a few months she was gone. Throughout all of that time, I should say that I took leaves of absence, and again, it was just a blessing, where I was at in my life that I was able to do that. I was able to take leaves of absence to help my parents out. So I was a primary caregiver along with my dad, and especially the last couple of months of her life, I was the person who was, providing her physical care, and she had appointed me her power of attorney and that type of thing, and so I was making decisions. And my mom, she didn't go take care of herself all of those years, but she planned. My mother made sure she had, coverage for certain things. She made sure she took out insurance so that when she passed, things would be taken care of and expenses would be taken care of. So again, she didn't take care of herself, but she thought ahead, and she was to think about how to take care of us when she was no longer here. And I'm so grateful for that, because, not because of the release of the burden, of having to do a lot of the things that you have to do when you're a caregiver, because I think a lot of people forget that caregiving isn't just providing for physical needs. It's also, you know, taking care of your loved ones' emotional needs, their spiritual needs, their financial needs, just taking care of helping them take care of their business when they're no longer able to. And my mom was very clear about what she wanted. She sat down with me and, you know, she wrote down all of her last wishes down to what color she wanted us to wear at her funeral. And knowing that I could always go to a document and say, when I had a decision to make, and say, this was Mom's wishes. You know, it gave me confidence to carry out what she wanted done on her behalf. So couple of months, it was the spring of 2006 when my mother died. A couple of months later, you know, after she died, my dad returns back to his work. There have been months of him really just not being able to work on a regular basis. He returns back to work. And again, you know, I was helping him, so he wasn't in a dire circumstance or anything like that, but he just wanted to get back to what he loved. That was so much of his identity. And he also needed some place to redirect this grief. It was a Saturday morning. He was out in the woods cutting down trees by himself. Fortunately, a neighbor went by to check on him and invited him up to the house for a meal. While he was sitting at that table, my father's aorta tore. Meanwhile, I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm my husband at the time, and I were doing something. I came home, they got a message, your father's been flown to Charlottesville. So my father was medevaced. His aorta tore. My father, I should mention, had never had a chronic illness his entire life. He had an injury. He had injured himself on the job. It wasn't the same. Chopping down trees or any sawmills aren't the safest jobs, as you can imagine. So he had suffered injuries, but never illnesses. My dad didn't have to take medication, and he was in his 70s, and he was like probably stronger than most 30-year-olds I knew at the time. But his aorta tore, and I know in my heart that his heart broke. His heart broke, and also the strains of caregiving, because yes, I was caring for my mom, but my dad was also there. And he was grieving. He lost the love of his life, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart what he had to go through afterwards. And it also broke my heart that, you know, I felt like that I couldn't be there for him in the same way that he had been there, that I had been there for my mom. I mean, I was there to support her, but like financially and like job wise, I had used all of that up basically with my mom, and I didn't feel that I could do that in my career again. And so my dad had one health problem after another, and he was placed on where they had to put a stent into his blood vessels. And so there was a risk of stroke. So he had to take a blood thinner. And so my dad, who never had to take any medication, was all of a sudden taking one of the most complicated medicines in the world. And he was doing it while he was a grieving widower, living by himself. And I'm 4 hours away. I'm going to take a note from Janine and take a breath before I continue with this. But there's years and years, long story short, of me back and forth up and down 95, coming out of meetings and getting to messages that my dad was in the hospital. And I went into this detail because I just wanted to note that, you know, my mother, whereas my mother, like I said, had been very detailed about all the arrangements and how to care for her, and she had been a caregiver and she guided me. I never thought of myself as a caregiver. We were truly care partners. I did feel like a caregiver with my dad because my dad's approach to it was, you know, well, call when I need her. And that actually made it very difficult, not being able to engage in the planning, not being able to have conversations, and operating on my dad. My dad's kind of assumption that I'll just keep going the way I am until I die. not realizing all of the things that could happen in between that conversation, or that lack of conversation, and when he did die. And one of the things that happened was he developed dementia. And around the time I found out that my dad got dementia, and, Sherelle's story and Lisa's story about getting calls about falls. My calls weren't falls, but I would call and the phone wouldn't ring, and the phone got disconnected on multiple occasions because he was forgetting to pay his bills and he wasn't able to keep up with things. And that's how I noticed that something was going on cognitively. And he was diagnosed with dementia, and we tried to keep him at home as long as we could, but I was 4 hours away. My other sibling was 2 hours away, and it just wasn't feasible. At one point, we were paying $400 a day to have home health aides come in and help him. He had sold some property, which made him ineligible for getting Medicaid right away. So he had a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. I was no longer working at that big law firm. I couldn't afford all of this stuff, and it was just going through all of his assets and mine, frankly. And it was just really hard to take care of him, and that was something that I hadn't experienced with my mom, the financial difficulties of it. And I had to make the decision that if he was going to be healthy and safe, he did have to go to an assisted living facility. And I felt terrible. I felt that he went to the memory care unit of a assisted living facility. I thought he was going to hate me. So I had my brother-in-law take him. I didn't go. That was the one appointment I didn't go to. I didn't transfer him to the assisted living facility. But I after he got there, I talked to the woman who ran it, and she's like, "Oh, your dad's just delightful. He's having a great time." My dad went to the assisted living facility. He thought that he was gonna, I guess he just assumed it was a hospital, and he was going to be there for a few days, but within a couple, and he would say, "Okay, I'll go check on home. I'll get you to take me to check on home in a couple of weeks." After a couple of weeks, he started calling the assisted living facility home. So there was all of that concern that he would hate me for nothing. And I say all of this because I know that it's hard for us to make these decisions when we think that it's contrary to what our loved ones want. But at the end of the day, as caregivers, the best things that we can do in the way that we navigate this, and I thank you for indulging me to use my personal experience to kind of punctuate some points and to go into detail. But the best things that we can do are to do our best to make sure that the people that we're caring for are as healthy as they can be under the circumstances, are safe and comfortable. And this is what I tell a lot of the caregivers that I've worked over through the years. And coming back to those three metrics: health, safety, and comfort, and finding the best circumstances and able to provide that, it gives them peace in the decisions that they make, and it gives their loved ones peace too, because your loved ones, and I'm going to make this next statement specifically for those of you who may be caring for folks with cognitive impairment. They may have articulated needs at one point in time before they were diagnosed with their illness. But you also have to remember that, especially if you're caring for a parent, they care about your well-being too, and they want what's best for you. So maybe they say they never imagine, living anywhere other than where they are, but they also never imagine you necessarily going through the tremendous stress of caregiving. And so coming back to those three metrics, I think helps you honor their wishes contemporaneously in the time, in the changing circumstances, because the person who may have articulated a wish years ago, they may not be able to communicate or exist in the same reality as you right now. It may be different. So those three metrics can help you meet in the middle. And then the other thing I would say as far as navigating this journey is that you have to take care of yourself. And I'm going to use my mom as an example. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but there can be serious health consequences. So I want to thank IAWH for sharing some of the questions that some of you who registered had. And one of them that stood out to me, can you suggest any self-care tools, and how do you balance the care of a loved one with taking care of yourself? And my answer to that is that you have to practice. And you have to practice the tools that you do find. Other caregiver speakers mentioned some of the things that some of the places they went to for supports. Area agencies on aging in the DC area. Ours is actually called the Office on Aging, but it usually comes from similar nomenclature. In counties and cities in every state, you have government entities that are focused on providing services to older Americans and people, and in some cases also people with disability, who are living with disabilities, who aren't necessarily over a particular age. Those offices have access to a lot of services. That's where your Meals on Wheels that you hear about, a lot of the respite services. And if you're unfamiliar with respite, that's when either a volunteer or some other companion comes to provide a break, essentially, for caregivers, so that they can take it for their own rejuvenation, or to take care of other things that they need to do. Respite can occur in the form of an adult daycare center. There are lots of different ways that can take place. Well, your area offices on aging can help connect you with those services. There are just a few big support infrastructures for caregivers in the country. And the way caregivers access support in this country is basically through the person that they're caring for. Unfortunately, we don't really have like a standalone government entity or body that really connects caregivers specifically with results. Hopefully we can change that one day, but for right now, your area agency on aging is one. Your Veterans Administration, if you're caring for someone, a spouse or a parent or another loved one who has been in military service, you definitely want to look into what benefits are available to them. And if you go to the Veterans Administration's website, and I'll try to remember to drop it in the chat before we log off. The VA has a caregiver support program, and right now that's actually the largest caregiver infrastructure program in the country. If you're the person that you're caring for meets certain eligibility requirements, you may be eligible for some financial assistance, as well as things like support groups, wellness checks for both your loved one and yourself. If you aren't eligible for that level of assistance, the VA program has a general caregiver support program that you can call to find out how to navigate the VA system. My dad actually was a veteran, and that's how I first got introduced to it. And I wish that I had made better use of it if I had known what was available. But the takeaway from that is that you have to look at like what services and supports the person that you're caring for is eligible for. And as you talk with case managers, etc., also ask what's available to you as a caregiver, because you never know. Support groups, I think support groups are vital. A lot through area agencies on aging, through the VA, through patient advocacy organizations. I know the Alzheimer's Association has a very vast network of support groups for people who are caring for others living with dementia. You can go onto their website and find support groups in your area, and normal non-pandemic circumstances, you can go in person, but there's also telehealth opportunities. Lisa had mentioned breaking it down into manageable pieces, and that's what you have to do with your self-care. If you have any underlying conditions, you have to prioritize the treatment of those along with the treatment of the person that you're caring for, because what did they tell you when you're in on an airplane? If in the case of an emergency, you have to put your own put your own mask on first. You have to put your own oxygen mask on, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to help someone else. And then I would say after that, your next priority would be, as far as your own self-care, is your exercise, your diet, and your sleep. You want to make sure that you're doing those basic things that you need to do. And even though you may feel like you don't have time for it, even if you just put a minimal amount of time into getting a little bit of activity every day, it will help, decrease your stress hormones. You don't have to like do anything, crazy, like, I don't know, what is it called? CrossFit. Necessarily. I'm not saying you have to go out and do that, but just getting up and walking around, getting a little activity, stretching a little bit, getting a little movement. Yes, exactly. I'm seeing Geraldine is giving us a perfect example. And then you want to reach out for that mental health and those social supports, and the different groups that I just mentioned can help with that. So I feel like I've been talking a lot. So I want to turn the conversation over to you and kind of, invite you all maybe to tell us, chime in and talk about how you're taking care of yourself, or if you have any other questions about how to navigate your journey.
I wanted to go back to something that Lisa talked about, the anger piece. And so I know you talked about the physical and emotional stress and strain of caregiving. I can remember when my mom was a caregiver to my grandmother, and she was suffering from what I think was dementia, but it was never diagnosed that. But there was an anger that was going back and forth that I can remember witnessing as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Probably anger from my mom for having to do the caregiving, even though she loved my grandmother. But also anger coming from my grandmother for having to feel like she was being taken care of. Do you deal with that? Do you see that very often? And what is that about? And how can you move through and past that?
It has a lot to do with grief. And I think actually somebody who registered had asked about at what point does caregiving become grieving? And a lot of times that term grieving is used in the palliative care context at end of life. But as you know, you're still caring for someone and you know that their death is imminent. But I would say that grieving can begin the day you become a caregiver, the day you find out about your loved one's diagnosis, or that something about their life is changing. And a lot of the anger, and as you may know, anger is one of the stages of grief. You're losing a lot. You're losing not just your identity, as a person and the things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. And yes, caregiving does bring its physical, emotional, and mental stresses. But also there's a relationship factor. Your relationship with this person is changing, as I think Cheryl was saying earlier, it's like sometimes the role is reversing. If it's a parent-child caregiving relationship, and the adult child is having to care for the parent in the way that they used to be cared for when they were small, that can be very difficult. You don't want that change. Even outside of the caregiving context, we can get angry about change because we're frustrated, and especially if there's nothing you can do about it, or if there seems to be nothing that you can do about it. In terms of the person who's receiving care, just imagine they're going through the same thing. They're losing pieces of themselves. They aren't able to live the way they used to. They don't have the same autonomy. The way that I would say you navigate this, and unfortunately I wish that there was a magic pill to any of this, but I think the closest thing that we have are a combination of patience and just compassion for each other, patience with ourselves, because sometimes it's just difficult to have patience, with someone else. And, we may have to take those moments and take a breath and come back to the situation if we can, and just compassion for each other. And those moments where they will inevitably come, where the anger and the frustration bubbles up and it expresses itself somehow. You always, of course, want to avoid harm. And I think that, most people do that. I think it's just rare circumstances where the anger can't be managed in a safe way. If it can't be managed in a safe way, obviously, you should reach out and those resources that I had mentioned earlier can help with that. If you feel like you can't provide care safely, or that the person that you're caring for may be a danger to yourself. But more often than not, it's just the day-to-day frustrations. And that taking care of yourself, the things that I mentioned about making sure that you're keeping your medical appointments, taking care of your medication, looking at your diet, getting your sleep, doing those things, even though it may seem like, oh, one more thing I have to do today, the cumulative effect of all of that is that it really fortifies you for this journey. And the cumulative effect of not doing those things is that it makes it harder to manage those inevitable moments of frustration.
One of the things that I had to do when making a schedule for my mother's aid was to figure out something in there for me. So typically the aid comes Monday through Friday, 8 to 6. But on Saturdays, I elected to make the time 12 to 8, and on Sundays, 12 to 7. So that meant that I had 8 hours for me. And even in this COVID world, I try to do something just so I can get some peace, because this task, there's absolutely no way to explain, to fully make people understand, unless they've experienced the whole caregiving task. Because I don't know who said it, but you are angry. I shared that I get angry because I don't understand how people can go about their day and realize that they have things to do and never call and say, hey, you got to go to the doctor, you have to do anything. So those things make you mad. But the piece that I have to reconcile is my emotions with my anger and my lack of passion. And I know that I need to see a counselor, but somewhere internally, I'm afraid of hearing things. So I have to figure out how to get past not wanting to hear certain things and just make the appointment, because I surely do need some type of consultation to get me past points that I don't even recognize I'm battling with.
A lot of my outlet was being involved with my job, with my family. I was in that sandwich relationship, because not only was I helping taking care of my mom, but I had my granddaughter as well that I was assisting with. So I don't know, I think they called it a sandwich relationship, because you're taking care of your mom and your grand. And so that was pretty much a lot for me during the time. But I had outlets with my job. I had a very, very demanding job. And even though it was demanding, that was sort of like an outlet for me, going to work, because I had to get away, because I saw my mother deteriorating, and that was wearing on me as well. And having the aides to assist, I had a gentleman as an aide, but he was one of the best aides that we had, because he really cared for my mom. Even though I had Mary there living with my mom, Ruben was the one that would get her up out of the bed. And it was for me, seeing my mother having to be bathed like a baby and taken care of, and as though she was a baby, those type of things wear on you. But I knew that it was coming to near the end, and all I wanted to do was to make sure that she was comfortable in those last stages of her life. So yes, you're angry. There's all kinds of emotions that you go through, but the one thing is to make her comfortable, or whoever your loved one is, to make them as comfortable as possible, because it's coming to near the end. And that's the best thing. And of course, having faith and your faith in God to get you through it day by day. That was the biggest part of my life, was that I had my faith.
All of the feelings are valid.
Thank you for saying that, Karen. I was going to say something similar to that everything that everyone, are feeling, some of the anger, frustration, they are valid, because they are what you're experiencing at the time. However, what I'm also hearing is, but I know that I need to find either a different outlet. I know, because I think that's the other side of caregiving, knowing that we need to care for ourselves. Lisa mentioned, a counselor, as well as her faith, and Sherelle mentioned her faith and outlet of work. I want to go back to the point about counselors. I know many jobs, if some of you are working, there's an employee assistance program. Often, jobs may offer employee assistance program, EAP. And I would highly recommend that you reach out to them. Sometimes people are hesitant because they think that then their job is going to know about their whatever the personal issue is. And when you make those appointments, it is done in strict confidence. And so no one else on your job will know that you've reached out to someone. And they offer an array of services, but counseling is one on a number of issues. And in this case, it would be, caregiving, or how to care for myself, or depression, financial as well. They can provide. And I wanted to ask others, as well as Karen, are there other areas that will provide counseling, perhaps not, with a fee associated with it? Anything else you can offer in that space?
Most of the free counseling is going to come through a support group. There are fewer opportunities, for one-on-one. I would always recommend, like, depending on what condition the person that you're caring for is dealing with, looking at the Patient Advocacy Association that's associated with that condition, because there may be some funding for some supports. There may be some resources available for supports that you can access directly as a caregiver, in addition to those support groups. It's not a substitute for counseling necessarily, but maybe if you're kind of hesitant to dive into that for whatever reason, because of cost, accessibility, or just not sure it's for you, or you're having trouble finding someone that you'd want to open up with, journaling is also something that a lot of caregivers do. A lot of times just having that opportunity to get that story out, and it's not necessarily a story that you want to share with your family and your friends, because of those feelings of guilt or anger, those are, you don't want to express those feelings, or you may not feel comfortable expressing those feelings with people who are closer to you. If you are, until you can find another person to talk to, journaling can help you bridge the gap. But I would definitely recommend searching, whether group-wise or individually, for some type of counseling.
I do want to ask others, if you are caregivers, and even if you are not, because we all need a certain level of support, who or what would you consider are your anchors? Your go-tos, because sometimes we forget, and particularly in this space of, we're all dealing with COVID-19 one way or the other, right? So what are your anchors? And I would love for you to open your mic and just to speak to, what do you turn to as your go-to source for support? And sometimes we forget that they exist. Does anyone have any comments to that?
My go-to is always my faith. It is singing, it is praying, it's meditating. It's even when walking, you just begin to allow God in that space where nobody else can come. And it is realizing, and I often use this and say this, it's taking a minute, because with caregiving, every minute and every second counts. And so learning to take a minute and realizing it can be multiplied. And within that minute, finding a moment where you breathe, a moment of peace. It may be a flower I'm thinking about, but it takes me away and it gives me that new energy to be refreshed and renewed, to be able to put one foot in front of the other and to keep on moving. But it's faith in God and believing that He will supply what I need, even when I don't think I have what it takes. But I can go to that moment that will be multiplied.
Thank you very much for that, Joyce. Anyone else want to speak to that?
As you know, Janine, I used to walk every morning, and then it started getting a little dangerous around here, and the time change made it kind of difficult for me to walk before I work. But I'm going to go back to that because it provided me a lot of peace mentally. But I have a cousin who thinks out of the box, just a different type of attitude. And she's that reality check that I need, because of course we see things how we perceive them, and our understanding is based on how we process information. But I tell you, no matter what I'm thinking, if I say I can't believe, well, why can't you believe it? That's what's happening, and it's happening because everybody does things differently. And she actually advised me to have a family meeting and say, hey, well, what is it that you can do? I need that piece, because I think I should tell them what I'm doing and they figure out where to fill in. But of course, after preparing for this, I saw that that's not the way to go. You need to let people tell you where they can fill in. And so I just need that reality check to let me know that, yeah, you might be upset, but you got to look at it from a different angle as well.
In fairness to Lisa, your first approach, maybe asking people, sometimes that also works. I mean, I think getting support is trial and error, and different things will work. And, it may, depending on who you're speaking with, having them tell you what they can do. Some people have no idea, and they don't help because they have no idea where to jump in, and which is why it's helpful for some caregivers to be able to tell folks what they need. And I think a lot of the reason why people shy away from helping, and why a lot of people in the primary caregiver role feel lack of support, is because there's a lack of understanding about the role. Most caregivers do not identify as caregivers. They're someone's daughter, they're someone's wife, they're someone's sibling, but they don't necessarily take on the term caregiver, and they don't know that it's a role that, people take on unpaid, and it's a role that they can play. And so effective communication about what it is can help address some of that uncertainty about the role. And a lot of people think that caregiving is that hands-on, being able to provide the medical and nursing tasks, and they feel like, well, I don't know how to do that. And you're not necessarily asking for help with those things. There are other things, there's like physical, emotional, spiritual, helping someone manage their affairs, running errands. There's just keeping someone company. I saw somebody noted in the chat about how a person receiving care, I think it was Nadine, had feel frustration over having to be in the care recipient role. So maybe they like it. Maybe the person who's receiving care might like a change of scenery and just have someone else sit with them, or I guess in these days, call or talk with them on the phone. So there are just so many different ways that people can help, and being like open and like putting it out there can help educate people, and maybe they can speak up and say, okay, well, I can help. Can I help you with this? I think I could do that. And having like just creating a space to have a dialogue about what needs to be done and how people can chip in.
Thank you. So leaning on others. I see in the chats, one says, I love listening to gospel music. And then someone else said, I don't really have someone to talk to all the time, because many of her family members are deceased. So she talks to her pastor or her spouse. So she splits up sort of, the sharing of information, but not necessarily, and very rarely does she share anything with family. And I know I found that to be true for many people, that they feel like they can't reach out to their family. So thank you very much for sharing that. Oh, please go ahead. Please, Jolene.
Yes, really what I wanted to share is that during the time that my mother was sick, and during her last times, I left my home and went and lived in a little room in her house. But what I did is, when she talked about the notebook, I thought about that because I came up with a book with names. They were people from my church. I had all lists of names of various people I could call. And then I had my siblings. I had a time for them. Everybody had a time that they had to do, because I was still working, and I worked in Philadelphia, and she was in Chester. And I came up with a list. This was your time to be there. This was your time to be there. And then I was still in organizations. So if I had a meeting to go to, I had somebody would just come and sit with her for the time that it was time for the meeting. So you reach out to your family and you reach out to your friends and come up with a little schedule, and you'd be surprised, just like they'll tell you what they can do, or they would be there. So those are the things that happened during her time.
That's amazing. And how you've split up sort of the roles by virtue of, and I think Karen had mentioned this earlier, we're finding out where people can give and, and that cuts down on the burden, if you will.
I can totally relate to that. I remember distinctly, my grandmother was a missionary, and it got to a point where my mother was calling on former missionary members to come and sit with her at certain times of the day. So there was the church and the people that my grandmother was involved with in the church that ended up coming and giving my mother relief, filling in the kind of scheduling. That's exactly what my mother did because it became overwhelming. So that's a really smart thing to do. Just rely on the goodness and kindness of friends, and they will step in.
They will. You touched on something because I have a question about technology. Are there apps that people are using? For me, we got my mom a new cell phone that had FaceTime on it. And that was really helpful, particularly during the summer for me. I could show her my garden, and where I'm sitting on the patio or not the patio, but the deck. And it just helps with connecting. And particularly, I have to go back to COVID because this is our reality, right? Is anyone using, sort of FaceTime to stay connected or other forms of technology? If so, you can drop it in the chat, but please do unmute yourself and share with us.
Well, there are a couple of things. I use technology, my cell phone, in my efforts to garden and commune with nature. That's a way that I do self-care. I can work in my garden or work in the yard or just walk around the yard and look for wildflowers. And I take photographs of them. And then I will make note cards or send notes to friends and family members as just a way to brighten my day and think about, do I have to clean the bathrooms? Do I have to do extra washing as part of caregiving? But it's a way that I can use technology to help me, as well as to commune with our kids and grandkids.
Are there any other ways that people are using technology? I think in the chat, I noticed that a few people sort of piped in.
Yeah, a family weekly Zoom.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep, Zoom, Facebook, Messenger, and LinkedIn.
Janine, one of the things I wanted to say, this year is going to be a different Thanksgiving for us. We're not going to be able to have Thanksgiving with our family. And so we're planning on doing a Zoom dinner because of the fact that we will not be going out to be with the family this year. I think a lot of people probably will be facing that Thanksgiving will be a little different for them this year. Well, one thing I wanted to say, Janine, financially, I think Karen mentioned this, to be able to be eligible for a lot of those services, the income has to be barely nothing. I had to buy down my mother's income because, as I said, she was from South Carolina and the family had a little bit of property in South Carolina. That was a no-no. I had to find a way to get her name off of that deed. Anything that related or tied her to any kind of finances, she was not allowed to have more than $500 a month. And I'm saying, how can anybody survive on that? But that's what you have to do. We had an insurance policy for her. I had to put my trust into the funeral home owner to sign the policy over to him, and that he would be trustworthy enough to knowing that now that belongs to him. It no longer belongs to me. And so thank God he, was that type of person. And when it came time for the funeral, he took the insurance policy that was in his name now, because I turned it over to him. And whatever was left over, he gave that back to me. But that's another thing you have to be aware of. Income has to be barely nothing. I mean, $500 a month is what she could not have any more than that.
That's interesting. You mentioned that, Sherelle. Thank you so much. And I know a lot of people will benefit, particularly those who are caring for parents or family presently. And that actually is a great segue into another question that someone popped into the chat. What advice do those who are, presently providing care, what advice do you have for people whose parents are still, that they're still, caring for? I don't want to sort of bias it by asking a particular thing. What advice do you have for them in terms of maybe the arrangement of your day, as Lisa mentioned, how she schedules the care for her mom? What advice do you have for people?
Well, it's going to vary so much from person to person. So what I would say is an attitude adjustment about how you're going to approach managing caregiving and managing your other responsibilities and managing your loved ones' needs and wants is to adjust your expectations. Not every day is going to be perfect. I worked with a woman who had been very stressed about getting her father, whom she cared for, ready for church in time. And she had devised all of these strategies about how to make sure that he didn't spend too much time in the bathroom getting ready so that they could get to church on time. And the thing that ended up working best for her was to eventually, and she tried a bunch of things, trial and error. That was part of our work together. She would come up with a strategy, we test it and see how it worked. What she ended up on was, it's not the end of the world if we're a little late to church. Everyone knows the situation. No one's going to hold it against us. So, just giving yourself, building as much flexibility as you can and to your schedule. But, of course, there are these things like, if there's transportation, for instance, and you have to be ready at a certain amount of time. Maybe just realizing that, maybe you think that your loved one has to be put together the same way they were before, whatever conditions affecting them now, and they have to get ready as if they're going to work, and you all just don't have time for everyone to do that in the morning. I'm using the getting ready every day as an example, but it can be applied to other things. Ask yourself, is it really that important to my loved one, or is it just important for me because I think this is an expectation that needs to be met? If, as long as, they're clean and, they feel comfortable about themselves, do they necessarily have to, get dressed to the nines like maybe they did 20 or 25 years ago? So I guess what I'm saying is that I think finding out what's realistic and understanding that you won't necessarily have space to do everything the way you always envisioned, and every day isn't going to be perfect. So giving yourself a little bit of grace just to get through the day, and go through this process of, finding out what your loved ones' needs are now, because they're changing now. If you're worried about maintaining the status quo, you can observe the new adjustments that need to be made.
I do want to just hear from you, and perhaps others if we have a few minutes. We talked about, I think it was Geraldine who mentioned having a book, and several other people mentioned a book, and Sherelle as well. But other ways to engage family in the care, sort of in any additional tips in that space. But maybe more importantly right now for this conversation, what about parents who you think really need to be, moved to other care, whether or not, they're going to move in with you or whatever? Do you have any tips for sort of bringing someone around to that point in your experience? What are some tips that you would have to family for that?
The biggest tip, and maybe this is for, I understand, the 1 in 6 people on this call who aren't necessarily caregivers, but may become caregivers in a couple of years, is it's never too early to start these conversations about what wishes are. I think that just maybe as a family sitting down and having a conversation about what caregiving is from both the perspective of the person giving it and the person receiving it, and what the challenges are, and the fact that even though we have all of these silo systems of supports, all of the different agencies that I mentioned, we don't have a national infrastructure to support caregiving yet. And so that doesn't just mean supporting caregivers, it means, giving care to the people who need it also. So it's a two-way conversation. So, having a conversation about what caregiving means, and the fact that there may need to be changes. If one of us is diagnosed with a condition, we may not be able to continue living here. What planning have you done in case something like that happens? So having those conversations as early as possible. If it's a little late if the diagnosis, for instance, has already happened, or there's been a fall, there's been something that's triggered, make caregiving more immediate. The best you can just kind of have conversations and ask, okay, so have you, check in, have you thought about this? Hopefully, the person that your loved one will be in a position to answer that question. And if they're not, you got to do some digging. I know for me, I had to kind of like dig through a bunch of my dad's documents and whatnot to kind of figure out different things that he had done that he hadn't talked to me about and to discover it. So you may have to do a little bit, as respectfully as you can, a little bit of reconnaissance on your own to kind of see what exists there. Having conversations with, if there are other siblings, other people who might be sharing this caregiving role, having those conversations early on. Well, what do you think you'd want to do? What are you comfortable doing? I mean, there are lots of stories. You can Google and go online and share where caregivers have given examples of their experiences. Maybe you can use those as conversation stories and say, okay, well, I see that this person in this situation had to manage their loved one's medications. Is that something that you feel comfortable with? Or you feel comfortable with bathing and and things like that? Or do you feel your strengths lie elsewhere? How do we divvy these things up? How much time would you actually have? There are caregivers who spend 30 plus hours a week. If you're working, how much time do you think you would be able to juggle? How much flexibility do you have at work? How much leave do you have at work to take off to do certain things? Having these conversations about who may be available when needs arise, because unfortunately you can't anticipate everything. Other things you want to talk about is, who's going to be financial power of attorney. This is going to be a very dicey subject, and I'll speak on my experience in the African American community. People I know, at least where I'm from, people get skeptical when someone gets the power of attorney, because without necessarily understanding that, that's not necessarily someone wants to do. That's something someone wants to do. It's a huge responsibility. Who would you want to take over your financial affairs? Who would you want to be an alternate for all of these things? Who would you want to help you with your healthcare decisions? Maybe that's somebody who's going to be different that's going to help you with your financial decisions. And again, who's going to be the alternate if they're not available, or if they're no longer around? So you have to have those conversations. Luckily, like ARP, for instance, if you live in the DC area, Legal Counsel for the Elderly can help you actually do a lot of these long-term planning documents, like your healthcare power of attorney, your financial power of attorney, for free if your loved one is an AARP member, and they can help you get those things in order and explain what those documents are about. The Alzheimer's Association can also connect you with their legal and financial planning workshop presenters if your loved one has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia. So those are tools that you want to look at, and preferably as early in the process as possible. If you can't begin it early, again, that phrase, just as early as possible. Once the diagnosis comes, delaying and waiting isn't going to help alleviate the obstacles and challenges later.
This discussion is so wonderful. It's really great that everyone is so engaged. I had a question that's slightly related to the kinds of information that you were just giving, but I also wanted to comment that I am beginning to see that there is some kind of a through line around falls, that falls are very detrimental and can cascade into so many other things. And that's actually how my mom came to finally succumb to her illness, because she fell. She was fine otherwise, and then she fell, and then it ended up being a head injury, and then one thing led to another. But the question that I really wanted to get to was, is there ever a need for caregivers to get the personal or patient information? And how does someone do that? Because I know there are patient information laws in place that keep things confidential. And how do you go about doing that kind of thing?
This is a great question, as are all of the questions that have been raised today. So HIPAA laws, you may have heard of, govern patient privacy. So, and it's a good thing they exist. Fortunately, providers can't just hand out your or discuss your healthcare information with just anyone. But caregivers obviously do need to talk with providers, especially when the people that they're helping to provide care for can no longer make decisions or communicate on their own behalf. So what the providers will need is consent to be able to release information to you. So if you've ever gone from one doctor to another doctor, your new doctor will ask for your medical records and your old doctor will ask for a release to give those records to your new doctor. That's essentially what happens whenever a caregiver asks for information or tries to or needs to communicate with a healthcare provider about their care recipient. They need to have some type of consent. And providers will generally have some type of form that the patient, the care recipient can fill out. And that's fairly straightforward. The tricky part arises when that person is no longer able to communicate on their own behalf, or they're no longer deemed to have capacity to make their own decisions. And in that case, hopefully you've had conversations ahead of time, and the patient has designated someone as their healthcare power of attorney, not to be confused with your durable financial power of attorney, because just because you have authority to talk to the bank doesn't mean that you have authority to talk to the doctor. These are two different things. So you want to make sure that you've, as early as possible, gotten the healthcare power of attorney, and there are form documents that you mentioned. Like I said, if you live in the DC area and you're an AARP member, legal counsel for the elderly can help you draw one of those up for free. I'm a lawyer by profession, so I feel like I shouldn't say this, but I know that people know that there are forms. I think it's called LegalZoom. I don't know. There's something like that online. You can find things like that online, but my disclaimer is I would suggest that you find an actual lawyer. There are usually legal clinics around somewhere
Yes.
where folks can help explain those things to you. And I'll try to wrap up very quickly on this, but the trickiest part is when the window has passed for the patient to be able to create a designated power of attorney. Just like with a will, just like with a financial power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney can only be granted when the person has legal capacity to do so. And if that's lacking, if that capacity doesn't exist, it makes it much harder for the caregiver. And you have to go through steps like possibly even guardianship through the courts in order to be able to get authority to do certain things on your loved one's behalf, which is why it is so important that people make these arrangements as early as possible. Just because you're creating a power of attorney, you're designating your power of attorney now in case something happens 5, 10, 20 years from now, doesn't mean that the person that you're designated can go, get into your bank account or go talk to your doctor. You can, the documents can specify that their authority only springs into action when you've lost capacity. That way you can assure the person who's the patient, the care recipient, can be assured that their autonomy is preserved for as long as possible.
That was one of the most difficult discussions for me to have with my mother, because I asked her what would her wishes be if she wanted to be resuscitated, if she had to be put on a machine. And so she said, I'll leave it up to you, whatever you decide.
And I feel like that's the hardest authority to give, because my dad actually gave the blanket authority, and it's difficult. My mother was very specific, but yeah, it's difficult.
That to me sounds like sort of the mantra, if you will, for this entire conversation, that compromise is important to manage care, because it's all about compromise, decision-making, communication, self-care, and having conversations early. And I love that emphasis on early, because Karen and others have actually shown us the degrees of health, and when those that we're providing care for, when they reach a point where they can't share their wishes with you, it just makes it more challenging. So starting those conversations early. This is such a great conversation.
It's been a great conversation, and This has been a really great opportunity for us to all learn and engage around this topic. This is so important. And I think just in talking about this topic and talking with Janine about this topic, I don't remember who you said it was that said it, but everyone has been, is currently, or will become a caregiver. So all of this information is so important for us. And thank you so much, Karen, for this information.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, you never know when you're going to need this information. So even if
Yeah.
you're not currently in a situation where you're a caregiver, you will be able to reach back on this conversation and some of the resources that will come about because of this conversation. And Janine, I know you can relate to this. For years, I worked on pressure ulcers and falls.
Me too.
And I thought, I'll never need this information. This isn't even, I don't even understand who needs this information.
Yep.
But there's a world out here that needs all of that information. So just like I didn't realize that I would need that information, you may need this information in the future. Janine?
Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. Also worked in falls and pressure ulcers as well. And I'll tell you, when you're going through, you're just program planning. But then the reality hits. So, and one other thing I want to say, if your loved ones are with you today, go through their house on your own and to remove rugs. That's one of the major issues that they're finding in homes of older adults is, they love throw rugs. Some do. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but I know we had to do that for my mother's house and she probably still has them. I just want to acknowledge all of the caregivers that are in this virtual room.
I just wanted to thank you again for inviting me. And I also want to thank Dr. Conley for sending the message out to all of our members of the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs Incorporated. You have become one of our favorite partners. And so we enjoy being on here with you when you have these ceremonies. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Conley, we enjoy you as partners. And so as Sherelle said, that her organization is one of our partners and they have been supporting us from the very beginning. And we're thankful and we're glad for members of the chapters that also have registered in abundance for these sessions. And we will continue and we listen to you and we will continue to provide content that is important to you.
Thank you for showing up strong.
There's many things I haven't, conquered, but I'm going to go through a list really quickly. Take steps to let go of guilt. That's what I heard. You can join some of our Writing for Wellness sessions. They take place on Sundays usually. Go to our website, IAWH.org, and you'll learn more about those. Join a caregiver support group. You can also sign up when alerted about other sessions that we're going to host around caregiving. Stretch. Breathe. We practice that several times today, and to get regular exercise, get some laughs into your day, as we've had opportunities to chuckle here, but also on a very serious topic, show that empathy as well, but taking care of yourself. Talk to someone once a day if you're able, outside of the person that you care for. Maybe it's a colleague or, family member or whomever, your faith leader. Get rest, set your alarm on your phone. I have mine set for a time to prepare for bed and also when I should be in the bed, and it works for me. Prioritize and enhance your efforts toward better nutrition, also to ask for help. And I think that has been an undercurrent, if you will, of our conversation. Maybe there's some things that you've heard that you can do right away. With that, I think we probably should wrap up, and we thank you. We thank our guests as well. We thank Sherelle Carper, Lisa L. Woods, our guest speaker, Karen Lindsey Marshall.
We can ask Karen if she has any final thoughts that she'd like to leave with everyone.
Thank you.
So thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for showing up today and showing up for each other. You have so much on your plate, so your time is just really appreciated, and your candor and your honesty talking about your experiences. And I'm so heartened by everyone in the chat and in the comments talking about how acknowledging how self-care is important. And I realized that I'm just realizing I didn't give a lot of specific advice on specific tools and techniques. So I'll just throw a hint to IAWH that if you want to bring me back to teach you some specific tools, I'm happy to do that, like some specific breathing techniques. But just know that you are not alone. So I guess that's the takeaway that I would add to this conversation, you are not alone. You are surrounded and supported, even though it's virtually, by phenomenal women just like yourselves, and you're all reflections of each other. And what we do, for those of us who are still caregiving, for those who have been caregiving, is so important for society. And it will be, as challenging as it is, I know that we'll all see gifts in it and learn, if only just learning about the strength that we had and during our caregiving journey and can take forward. So my best wishes to everyone who's on this journey, and thank you for being on it.
Thank you, Karen, so much. You have been a wonderful contributor for both now and in the future. Yes, we will continue to work with you in the space of caregiving and also other tools and techniques. And in the 2021 year, we're looking forward to spending more time with you. Coming attractions, we have a Becoming Together in Blue, is a seasonal happy hour with a women's health focus, and that's Friday, not Saturday. Friday, December 7th at 7 p.m. You'll see more promotion around that activity. We're looking forward to a really fun discussion. If you read the book, great, because we're going to just include some questions from the book. And if you haven't, it's still fun because it's going to be shaped around women's health. And it's just an exchange between us, ladies. And then Sherelle hosts a Writing for Emotional Wellness. And this particular session is going to be on forgiveness. And that's Sunday, December 13th. And Karen mentioned journaling as one of the sort of tools and also a technique to care for ourselves. And that's at 3 p.m. on Sunday, December 13th. For both events, you can register on our website, IAWH.org. And if you want to go ahead and put /events, you'll get right to our list of coming events. You can find us on social media, on all platforms, basically using @AdvancingHerHealth, @AdvancingHerHealth, and Twitter is IAWH_herhealth. Sherelle, could you please introduce, we have just a new feature on our website.
Oh, good, I can see it now.
Good.
So this is our new feature on our website. It's an opportunity to become a friend of IAWH. And so this page, we have a link that will take you to this page. We'll be sending it out following today's session. But it's an opportunity for you to sponsor future programming, make IAWH even more yours. And so what you will be able to do is, by becoming a friend of this organization, you will be able to support the programming, but also honor a woman, either currently living or an ancestor, that has made an impact on your life, on her community, on her world. And so here are the generous sponsors that supported this particular program today on caregiving. The Smith family, in honor of their mother and grandmother, Fannie Smith. The Thompson Bradshaw family, in honor of their mother, Beulah Mae Thompson. The Wright family, in honor of their aunt, Gladys McElroy. And we have donors, Catherine McKay, Mary Eggleston, and Robert Lyons. And so with every program, we will be honoring individuals and their families as they make sponsorship and become friends of the organization. At the top tier of becoming a friend, we will also feature a photograph, candid photographs of women that will be honored, but also giving a little bit of a history of the woman and what made them so fantastic, what made their legacy. What is it about them that makes you want to honor them? So we will be sending around a link introducing you to this program, and we're happy to launch it just in this coming week. So you've gotten a sneak preview.
We embrace you and we thank you for your attention. We thank you for your engagement, your feedback, for being here, and continue to support IAWH. Thank you. Thank you to our guests, our guest speaker, and we bid you adieu. Thank you.